I stopped paying the mortgage on a house that was never going to be mine, and it took my family 3 weeks to even notice I was gone. Welcome back to the Family Revenge Tales. My name is Lena Parker, and for 6 years, I was the only reason my parents kept their home in the Blue Ridge Mountains. Nobody ever said it that way out loud. My mother liked to tell relatives I helped out sometimes, the way you'd mention someone chipping in for groceries on a Sunday. She never said I had been quietly wiring money every single month since I was 28 years old, watching my own dream of owning a home shrink smaller and smaller in the distance, while I paid, faithfully, for someone else's. I'm a CPA in Charlotte. Good job, tidy apartment, the kind of quiet discipline that makes people assume you don't need anything from anyone. That assumption is exactly what my family lived on for 6 years, and I let them because I believed I was building towards something. I believed patience was a kind of investment, too. It started with my cousin Tyler. He runs an excavation and landscaping business, and back when I was 28, his company was drowning in equipment debt. My parents took out a home equity loan against the house they loved most in this world to bail him out. My father believed Tyler would recover quickly. He didn't, so because the new loan payments were steep and my father's hours had just been cut at the plant, they asked me to help. Just temporarily, they said, just until things stabilized. I said yes. Temporary became permanent so quietly that I never noticed the exact moment it happened. There was no single day I decided to give up 6 years of my life. It happened one wire transfer at a time, one just this once at a time, until the exceptions became the routine and nobody, including me, thought to call it what it was. I paid the loan every month. I paid the property taxes, the homeowner's insurance, a new roof after a bad storm tore through the ridge, septic repairs, a 2 a.m. plumbing emergency I handled entirely by phone from 3 hours away, calling contractors, giving them my card number, apologizing to a stranger for the inconvenience of fixing a house I didn't own. I never made a scene about any of it. I never sent a group text demanding anyone notice. Whenever I did work up the nerve to ask how much longer this would go on, my mother gave me the same answer every single time, like a line she had rehearsed in front of a mirror. "You're family, Lena. One day this house will be yours." I believed her enough to postpone buying my own home for 6 straight years. I believed her enough to keep renting a 1-bedroom apartment while I sent thousands of dollars a month toward a mortgage with someone else's name on the deed. I told myself it wasn't a sacrifice. I told myself it was patience. Looking back, I'm not sure there's much difference between the two, except that patience assumes someone is keeping score on your behalf. I found out exactly how wrong I'd been on a Saturday morning in April, standing on that same porch, surrounded by nearly my entire family. My mother had texted that week, "Come Saturday, we're finally signing the papers." I remember reading it on my lunch break and feeling something loosen in my chest for the first time in years. I assumed, reasonably I thought, that after 6 years of quiet payments, my parents were finally putting the house into a trust. Maybe adding my name to the deed. Maybe finally making official what I had believed for so long was already true in every way that mattered. I even took the morning off work. I brought a folder of financial documents with me because some part of me expected they would need my help understanding whatever paperwork a lawyer had drawn up. I drove the 2 hours from Charlotte with the windows down, past the same mile markers I'd driven past 100 times before, feeling, for once, like today was the day all that quiet sacrifice finally became something solid. Instead, I pulled into the gravel driveway and found Tyler there with his wife and kids. Aunt Dana stood off to the side with her arms crossed, wearing the expression she gets when she already knows something you don't. My parents sat together on the porch swing my father built decades ago, and the moment I saw my mother's face, something in my stomach dropped before a single word was spoken. She stood and said, "We've decided that Tyler should take over the property." I actually laughed, not because anything was funny, because my brain, for one merciful second, simply refused to process it as real. She explained, gently, like she was doing me a favor I hadn't asked for. Tyler had children. His business needed stability. I had a good career, a whole life ahead of me. I could build another life anywhere I wanted. The property should stay in the family, and Tyler is the one who truly needed it. Nobody used the word inheritance. Nobody mentioned 6 years of payments. It was as if that part of the story had simply never happened, or had happened to someone else. Tyler didn't even have the decency to look uncomfortable. He glanced up from his phone and said, almost casually, "Paperwork's already being drawn up. Should be final in a few weeks." Already being drawn up. Nobody had asked me one single question. This wasn't a discussion I'd been invited into. It was an announcement I happened to be standing in front of, holding a folder of numbers that suddenly felt like evidence in a case I hadn't known I was building. I didn't scream. I've spent my whole life being the calm one, the responsible one, the one who doesn't make things harder for everyone else. And some old instinct took over in that moment and carried me through it. I told them I needed time to think. I hugged my mother goodbye, the way you hug someone out of habit rather than feeling. Then I got in my car, drove back to Charlotte, and sat at my kitchen table until well past midnight, with 6 years of bank statements spread out in front of me like evidence. I want to be honest about something. I didn't open those statements that night looking for a way to hurt anyone. I opened them because for the first time in 6 years, I needed to actually see my own life in black and white, instead of trusting a promise I'd never once put in writing. I typed numbers into a spreadsheet with my hands shaking slightly, and I remember thinking more than once that I should stop, that I didn't actually want to know the total. I kept going anyway. The number that came back was worse than I'd let myself imagine, worse than I had quietly, deliberately avoided calculating for exactly this reason. 6 years of mortgage payments, taxes, insurance, repairs. It came to more money than I had put into my own retirement account across that same span. More than a down payment on a home of my own, twice over, maybe closer to 3 times over once I accounted for the interest I'd never earned because that money had gone somewhere else. I sat with that number for a long time, and then I found something that stopped me cold. Buried in an old email thread from 4 years earlier was a passing reference to a second loan, not the original home equity loan I already knew about, a different one, taken out later for an amount that had never once appeared on any statement my parents had shown me. My hands were properly shaking by then. I pulled up the county property records the next day during my lunch break, refreshing the page twice because I didn't trust what I was seeing the first time. There it was. A second lien against the property, taken out 2 years after the first, right around the time Tyler had mentioned he was expanding his equipment fleet. Nobody had told me. I had spent years protecting a house that was quietly carrying debt I didn't even know existed, debt that had nothing to do with the emergencies I'd been told I was covering. I didn't call my parents and confront them. I didn't send an angry message demanding answers. Instead, I did something that frightened me far more than any argument would have. I simply stopped. No announcement, no ultimatum, no dramatic phone call. I canceled the automatic transfer I'd set up years earlier with 3 quiet clicks on my banking app. I stopped answering calls from the contractor, who usually came straight to me whenever something broke. If the roof leaked, if the septic system failed again, it was no longer my problem to solve at 11 o'clock at night from 3 hours away. And then I waited to see what would happen. For 3 weeks, nothing did. I want you to sit with that the way I had to. 3 weeks. Nobody called to ask if I was okay. Nobody asked why the payment hadn't gone through. Nobody even seemed to register that I had gone quiet, that the person who had been silently holding their world together for 6 years had simply let go. I remember one Tuesday night in particular, sitting alone in my apartment with my phone face up on the counter, staring at a screen that refused to light up, and feeling something crack open in my chest that I hadn't expected. It wasn't anger, it was grief. Real, physical grief for a version of my family I had believed in so completely for 6 years that apparently never truly existed at all. But something else happened during those 3 weeks too. Something I didn't see coming. I started sleeping through the night again for the first time in longer than I could remember. I laced up my running shoes and went out before work, the way I used to before all my extra money went into a house that wasn't mine. I walked through 2 open houses on back-to-back Saturdays just to see what I could actually afford now that I wasn't quietly bankrolling somebody else's inheritance. For the first time in years, I let myself imagine a front door with only my own name behind it. And the feeling that came with that imagining wasn't guilt. It was something closer to hope, tentative and unfamiliar. Then, on a Wednesday morning, my mother finally called. I still remember exactly what her text said right before the phone rang. Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "I'm sorry." It said, "The property payment didn't come out." I stared at that message for a long time before I answered. "I didn't authorize it," I finally wrote back. She called within the minute. "Lena, what is going on? Your father can't handle this kind of stress right now. Tyler has children depending on this. We're family. After everything we've done for you?" "Why didn't you tell me Tyler was getting the house?" I asked. My voice came out steadier than I expected. I was almost proud of that. Silence. A long, heavy silence on the other end of the line. It told me more than any explanation could have. A few days later, Tyler showed up at my office in Charlotte, unannounced, saying he only wanted to talk. It took less than 5 minutes for me to understand he'd already been meeting with a realtor to sell off part of the property, planning to use the money to stabilize his business, fully expecting that I would keep quietly making the payments until the paperwork cleared and the house was legally his. "So you've already spent money on a house you don't own yet?" I said. He got defensive fast, the way people do when they've been caught assuming something they never bothered to confirm. "You always make everything about money, Lena." "No," I told him. "You made it about money 6 years ago. I just finally started reading the statements." He left my office without saying much else. I sat at my desk afterward for a long time, staring at nothing in particular. That weekend, I drove back up to collect a few of my things, and while I was there, I wandered into my father's old workshop, the little shed behind the house where he used to build things when I was small. I wasn't looking for anything. I just wanted somewhere quiet to sit for a few minutes before the drive home. That's where I found the toolbox. Dented metal, heavier than it looked, full of paper. Bank statements, copies of every payment I had ever made, organized carefully by year in his handwriting on the tabs. The hidden loan documents, notes about Tyler's debts, dates circled, numbers underlined twice like he'd gone back over them more than once, unable to quite believe them either. Repair receipts going back 6 years. And on top of one stack, in my father's handwriting, a single sentence that made my knees go weak right there in the doorway. "She thinks nobody notices." I found him outside a few minutes later and asked him directly, holding the sentence out to him like it was something I needed him to explain. He didn't try to deny it. He sat down slowly on the porch step, and for the first time in my life, my father looked genuinely, quietly ashamed. I knew you were giving up your own future to protect ours, and I was too afraid of your mother and of Dana to say anything about it out loud." He was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the mountains instead of at me. "Your mother thinks strong people don't need protecting, Lena. She grew up believing that. Her own mother leaned on her the exact same way for years, and nobody ever thanked her for it either. She learned that sacrifice was just what a good daughter does. I don't think she ever set out to do the same thing to you. I think she just never learned another way to love someone. I sat down beside him on the step, and for a while, neither of us said anything else. There wasn't much left to say that the toolbox hadn't already told me on its own. Once I stopped quietly covering the property's expenses, the cracks in Tyler's business became impossible to hide. Word got back to my father through a supplier he'd known for years. Tyler was 3 months behind on equipment payments, couldn't make payroll for 2 of his crews, and had been telling lenders and suppliers alike that he owned the mountain property outright, using it as collateral in conversations he had no right to be having. The house was never simply a future home waiting for him. It was an exit plan he'd already started spending against, built entirely on money that had been quietly coming from me without anyone bothering to ask where it came from. When the truth surfaced, my family didn't turn on Tyler first. Aunt Dana turned on me right in front of everyone at the next gathering, accusing me of abandoning my own parents in their time of need. So I laid it all out on the table. 6 years of payments, the hidden second loan, every repair, every receipt, every transfer. The supplier records showing exactly what Tyler had been promising people, with a house that was never his to promise. Nobody could argue with numbers laid out that plainly. A few relatives apologized quietly, off to the side, where nobody else could hear them. Tyler didn't apologize at all. He simply stopped coming to family gatherings, and after a while, nobody bothered chasing after him to ask why. Weeks later, my father suffered a heart episode. I drove through the night to the hospital, and sitting in that waiting room under fluorescent lights, I understood something clearly for the first time in years. I was there because he was my father, not because I was responsible for his bills or his choices or the debts other people had made in his name. Those had never truly been the same thing, though I had let them blur together for 6 long years without ever questioning it. He recovered enough to come home, and one quiet afternoon, while I sat beside his bed, he took my hand and said, "I should have protected you when you were protecting us." I didn't say anything back. I just held his hand and let myself finally cry for the first time since that Saturday on the porch. A few weeks after that, the family came back to me with what they called a fair solution. Not the entire house, 50% ownership. On paper, it almost sounded generous. When I read the agreement line by line, though, I found the trap hidden carefully inside it. I would share the remaining debt. Tyler would retain full management authority over the property. My parents would keep lifetime occupancy rights. Tyler's company could still use part of the land for equipment storage, and I couldn't sell my own share without approval from the rest of the family. It wasn't an inheritance at all. It was another obligation simply wearing a nicer coat. At the final family meeting, I brought everything with me. The 6 years of payment records, the hidden loan, the supplier statements, the new agreement, every trap clause highlighted in yellow so there could be no confusion about what I'd found. I set it all on the table and looked at Tyler first, not my mother. "You told a lender you owned this property before a single paper was ever signed," I said. "That's not family loyalty. That's fraud, with my name quietly attached to the payments underneath it." Tyler's face went pale. For once in his life, his silence didn't sound casual. Then I turned to my mother. "You didn't invite me here to give me half the house," I told her. "You invited me because you finally needed someone responsible enough to inherit the debt Tyler already created." My mother broke down in tears at the table. She admitted, for the first time in either of our lives, that she had never really thought of me as someone she was hurting. She simply thought of me as the daughter who could handle everything, so she never had to stop and ask what I actually needed. "I know you were hurt by your own family," I told her, as gently as I could manage. But you don't get to heal that wound by handing it to me. I refused the ownership deal. I refused to take on Tyler's debt. I refused, finally and completely, to keep confusing inheritance with love. I walked away from that table without the house. Within the year, the property sold, and the proceeds went straight toward paying off both loans. Tyler lost the business almost entirely. 2 suppliers filed claims against him once the truth came out, and without the property left to quietly lean on, there was nothing left to stall them with. My mother and Aunt Dana spent months afterward blaming each other for things that had been broken long before I ever stopped paying a single bill. Months later, I bought a small farmhouse just outside Charlotte. It isn't fancy. It doesn't have the mountain view that used to take my breath away every summer of my childhood. But every single dollar of it belongs to me. And for the first time in my life, the deed has only one name on it that matters. I brought my father's unfinished porch swing home with me. He'd been building it in secret during his last months of good health, and I hadn't understood why until I found, carved faintly underneath one board, 4 quiet words: for Lena's front porch. He had known, somehow, long before I did, exactly whose home this was always supposed to be. I finished it myself over a few weekends, careful not to sand away his handwriting. Now it hangs on my own porch, and some evenings I sit there as the sun goes down behind the trees and simply breathe. I still help my mother sometimes. I drive her to appointments, I help her with paperwork when she asks, I answer her calls. But I don't pay her bills anymore, and our relationship is smaller now than it used to be. Smaller, but honest. I've stopped waiting for an apology I may never receive, because I no longer need my family to admit I was right in order to know, quietly and completely, that I was. I didn't lose my inheritance that year. I finally stopped being one. If this story moved you tonight, if any part of it reminded you of your own family, your own quiet sacrifices that nobody ever fully saw, please take a moment to subscribe to the Family Revenge Tales. Every story here is for anyone who has ever given more than they received and wondered, late at night, if it would ever be enough. You are not alone in that feeling, and your story matters just as much as Lena's does. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't fighting for what you were promised, it's finding the courage to walk away from it and building something honest with your own 2 hands instead. And if you're wondering what this story really means underneath everything that happened to Lena, it's a reminder that love and financial responsibility are not the same thing, and confusing the 2 can quietly cost a person their entire future without anyone intending real harm. It shows how patterns of sacrifice can repeat themselves across generations until someone finally has the courage to break the cycle, even when breaking it feels lonely and uncertain. It teaches that setting a boundary with the people you love isn't betrayal. It's often the only way to protect your own life while still holding on to genuine love for the people who hurt you. And most of all, it offers real hope that walking away from what you were once promised isn't the same as losing everything. Sometimes it's the only way you'll ever get to build something that is, finally and completely, your own.